over the course of the spring semester to get people up to speed, especially people in the Office of Research, people in the dean's offices may want to really get more and more sophisticated with it, but it's pretty, at its basic level, pretty easy to use.
You prompted the question of who all has access to it?
So now that we are getting people trained up on it, right now our deans have access, our Office of Research, certainly folks in the provost office. We would like to make this available to department chairs as well. And I'll say a little bit at the end about how we hope to make this part of our institutional annual assessment. I think in my personal experience, this, again, as I said, this is my third institution. Where it worked well, we had broad access. If there's one person sitting in their office who has access to this, you're not really using it the way it should be used, which is for knowledge discovery. And it becomes more of an evaluative tool. So I was glad that we were able to get those. I'm not able to advance again the slides. That we were able to get those guidelines for use with the Faculty Senate. So for the purpose of the demo that I'm going to show you right now, we used our strategic planning peers, those identified in the 2014 and then the 2014 to 2019 strategic plan. But as I said, you can click on and off the boxes and say, no, we don't want to see, we only want to see the ones in Pacific Northwest, for example. So just keep that in mind as I'm showing this to you. So the first thing we did is we looked at ourselves, and that arrow shows you Washington State University. We compared ourselves to all public Research One universities. So all the very shaded ones behind that you can't read the names of, those are all of the public R1s in that group of 455 institutions. The ones that are slightly less difficult to read are those strategic planning peers. And if you look at us as a whole, the whole system, we rank, and you'll see a little more how you come up with this research strength ranking, but we rank in the 78th percentile for all public R1 peers, even though in terms of faculty size, we're in the 32nd percentile. This is what we were getting at this morning in the presentation. We're small but mighty, and academic analytics, the words that they used were that we were punching above our weight. If you look straight up at the top, right, the only letters you can barely make out there, Purdue University. We are on a par in terms of research strength with Purdue, but you can see that they're like 3 times the size of the faculty of WSU. So this is really telling, and it's part of the story that we need to get out. We also should probably try to grow our faculty, but that's another matter. But just imagine what we could do if we were the size of Purdue, right? So then what you can do is you can say, well, let's look at one college. And so we chose Connors. Connors is a really good example because it's quite diverse in terms of disciplinary expertise. And the departments that are in Connors in our university are not necessarily the departments that are in other colleges of agricultural sciences, right? For example, we have human development, we have economic sciences are in our Connors. Those might be in another college. So what's very important is that we're not comparing apples to oranges here. What academic analytics does is looks at our Connors and compares us to peers using those disciplines that are in our Connors. So that way you're getting a real assessment of the research strengths. In this case, Connors is in the 97th percentile among public R1 universities that are in that 455, and as you see in the 28th percentile in terms of the size of our faculty. As a reminder for those of you listening, that this does include our extension program, which is located in Connors in our case. So as much as they could determine that, they were also including that for our peers.
So at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is get apples to apples, the closest that you can get to.
That's exactly right. So you can really get closer to apples if you look at the department level. So I picked on my home department of anthropology, and I call this the spider web. What you're looking at here is all around the outside of that circle. And if you're looking at it in the book, you can see it more clearly. The green represents federal grants. The red at the bottom is citations. The orange is conference proceedings. The blue is articles, peer-reviewed journal articles. The purple is books. And then that yellow where the arrow is pointing, those are awards. Those are national and international awards. The gray shaded circle in the center of the bullseye is the median for all public R1s in the database. And so what you can see is in the case of the Department of Anthropology, we're well above the median in every single category. Maybe not quite so stellar in books, but I would say that's probably because we have a very strong, more strong in terms of citations rather than being single authored book focused anthropology. Anthropology departments vary in their subfields, but we're the weakest in awards, in national awards, especially proportional, right? If you look at every other category, you should say, well, we should be getting all sorts of national and international awards. And we're not. And this is not the only department where we saw this. I would say overall, the departments and the colleges I've looked at, it's the awards that we could do better at. We're still not doing poorly, right? That's still we're close to the median, but it's relative to the other successes. So that's something Chris Keene and I have talked about, and we'll continue to work with our institution leaders to really think about, can we come up with, some institutions have like an engine, they have an office that all they do is churn out award nominations.
Award nominations are difficult, like they're very time consuming, but I would say that this is indicative of probably a problem that we are consistently talking about, where we are not capturing the story of WSU and the stories within WSU and creating our own kind of database that information can be mined from and pulled from and dropped into different awards, right? So it does start with the narrative of how we are telling the WSU story.
Absolutely. And this database will actually allow us to do it better. And I'll show you in a second. I'm not sure if it's my next slide. No, but it's the one after this.
Yeah.
A suggestion on how we could improve that. So then this is, if you look also at anthropology, if you wanted to look, and this was really helpful to me when I was a new dean and I wanted to look at my 40 departments and programs and really get to know them on one level, on a data-oriented level quickly. If you look at this, you can't see it too well on the screen, but in the book, the green dots are assistant professors, the orange dots are associate, and the purple are full professors. And along the bottom line there is the years since terminal degree. So folks who are towards the left side of the screen are new assistant or associate professors, and those towards the right have been at the institution. The farthest one to the right in anthropology is over 40 years on the upper right, but look where that person is, way up there in terms of the scholarly research index. So this is a scholarly research index, and you can see that there are quite a few dots above that line, which is the median. And again, you can compare us to particular peers. So for example, when I was an anthropology department chair, I said to my chancellor at the time, I know you have these institutional peers, but they don't actually have great departments of anthropology. And he said, well, who are your peers? You tell me who your peers are. Who do you aspire to be like? Who do you want to measure yourself against? So we could, as an institution, ask each department to benchmark itself against those who they aspire to be like. Doesn't mean we can't, as an institution, then think more broadly about our institutional peers. So then to your question, Marty, on the next slide, one of the things that you can do is you can identify awards for faculty members where they are a good match based on their scholarly productivity. So in this case, we took a professor, we didn't put the person's name, but they're a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And based on their publications, their citations, their collaborations, their federal funding, this database ranked them at 1.0, which is a perfect match for a Fulbright scholar. And then a member of Gamma Sigma Delta, American Society of Civil Engineers, down on one being a perfect match, and you can see there are a number of matches there. So the idea is that we can use this to be more targeted, because that's part of the task. Like you say, it's very difficult to do the research, figure out who would match up to it, and then put in the nominations. This does a lot of work for you. So if you click on Fulbright Scholar, it'll take you to the particular program. You can also compare yourself to other people who have received that award, compare your faculty member to other people who received it, and see what kinds of products of scholarship they would need to be eligible for that. So I think this is going to help a great deal. The other thing it helps us do, and I was thinking of this morning when we were talking about water, is that it helps you, I know it's like a Rorschach test, but it helps you identify networks. So in this slide, we took we said, okay, with WSU you could say a research interdisciplinary research area like cybersecurity or cultural heritage or data analytics or water, and say, who do we have who's doing work on that across all disciplines, and who are they working with? Who are they working with on the campus, and who are they working with off the campus? And what is the nature of that collaboration? Is it a publication? Is it a grant? Is it something else? And so this just really shows you that we've got lots of webs of connection. This one, I'm not sure it's less confusing, but there's a faculty member in the middle there, Diane Cook, and the blue dots are well, that doesn't look blue on that screen, but on your handout, the blue dots are WSU faculty. It shows that she has lots of articles with other WSU faculty, but she has a number of conference proceedings and also grants, both with faculty on campus and off campus. So again, it allows you to use this as a knowledge discovery tool. And when we put this together, we could click on and off, like, let's just look at WSU faculty and let's look at just external.
Elizabeth,
Oh yeah.
as I'm looking at the one in our handouts, there's something that says an expanded circle is more collaborators. The smaller one is, of course, fewer collaborators. But I'm basically, does that mean the individual little dots, because they all look like they're the same size? No, not that one.
Yeah, I was trying to think see if the key was on this one. I think this is, these look all the same size, but if you look at the previous one, which is the collaborative networks, you see that there are differentiation in the size of the dots. I think it just so happens in this one that there's not great differentiation.
Okay, thank you.
So finally, this is my last slide, and then happy to open it up for discussion. One of the things that the academic analytics colleagues mentioned to us when they were doing the trainings was that this can help you identify potential retention risks. So, if you saw an assistant professor who was well above anywhere we would expect, and they were 3 years in, and you compared them to peers and said, wow, we need to get in there and make sure that we're doing what we can to support the stellar scholar. Otherwise, maybe they're going to see the grass is greener somewhere else. It also, as I've demonstrated, can show the best pathway to national awards and international awards. And that's something that I know Chris and I and the deans are going to be talking about. How do we use this data to now create an institutional structure or mechanism to make sure that we're really pounding the pavement on those. Really interesting to department chairs, this can help us identify external reviewers for tenure and promotion. Again, when I was a department chair, if I had a scholar in my department who was up for tenure who studied lemurs in Madagascar, I don't know how to find people who could potentially serve as external reviewers on that. That's not my field. And so you can go in here and you can use that to potentially identify those. Also nominators for those prestigious awards. Who else, oftentimes if you've received the award, then you can serve as a nominator for that award. And then finally looking at unit composition. this is something that I wanted to mention again. As a new dean, I was onboarding and I looked at one of my natural science departments, and I saw that they had overwhelming number of assistant professors and one associate professor, and then maybe 3 full professors. And so I was seeing that the majority of their faculty have been hired in the past 5 years. And so I identified that as potential for mentoring, thinking about how do we make sure that those assistant professors, you can't put that all on the back of one associate or folks who are about to retire or wanting to retire. How do you make sure that you're supporting them? So it allows you to look at unit composition. It allowed me to, for example, if that department came to me and said, I want to hire a faculty member, I would look at their academic analytics and say, would you consider hiring at the associate level? Because you have a lot of assistant professors and this might be a little too bottom heavy. We need some, bring in some people with some more expertise. So it just allows those conversations. It doesn't determine the outcomes, but allows you to have those conversations. But there was, then the last thing that I was going to bring up is what your question was about who will have access. So Laura Greiner Hill and I are going to be meeting with the Faculty Senate Executive Committee and talking about this. But what I would really love to see is an annual process where department chairs in particular are using access to this to have conversations with the faculty in the department about where are we now? How do we compare to our peers and aspirational peers? Where do we want to go? And I would hope that this would be empowering to chairs as they're making cases to their deans for hiring, for example. Like, look, this is where we are. This is where we're trying to be. This is what we think we need. Here's a data-informed argument for a faculty hiring plan. And then that dean can make that same case to the provost, so we can think more strategically as an institution about where we want to put our hiring. So that's what I would really like to see, an annual process of using this, not exclusively, because like I said, there are lots of types of data that we could use that could augment this, especially for fields that are outside of social science, humanities, and so that is the presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much for that. And it's really a powerful system. And I think we'd all like to see, once you get it implemented, sort of get periodic reports on how it's being used and how it's received and so forth. In your examples of functions, are these ones that you've come up with based on your past use, or is there some sort of associated database that gives examples of the breadth of areas where it's being used across all the institutions?
So these, I should say, Laura Greiner Hill and I put this PowerPoint together and really come from a lot of the training sessions that we've attended. I should mention that Vice President Chris Hoyt has been championing our membership in academic analytics, and she has brought their leadership team physically to campus and virtually to campus to anyone who wants a demonstration of the power of it. So those examples of functions, there's more that it can do than those, but those to Laura and I really seem like the top level priorities for us, as well as the last one that I mentioned, which is about making sure we have some kind of annual assessment and planning cycle built into this, because otherwise I won't name any names, but one of the institutions I was at, this was only the only logons were in IR, not even in the Office of Research. Institutional research and the provost office were the only people who logged in and saw it, and they used it for every 5 years evaluating each department. And it's a waste of a good resource if that's all you're going to do with it. And what they would do is they would print out a static, like what I just showed you, they'd print out a physical printout and we'd go to a meeting and we would evaluate that department. The power of it is as knowledge discovery, as I said, to say, what if we choose different peers? What if we choose conference proceedings instead of articles? What if we only look at the assistant professors? If you don't use it that way, then you really are not getting the most out of it. So that's one bullet point that I would add at the bottom there.
Okay, that's great. Other questions? Chris.
I'd just comment that one of the things that academic analytics is, it's also very useful for, and Elizabeth touched on this, it's, identifying what we're good at, right? And you have to do a little interpolation on the results to get that. But it's surprisingly hard to maintain a good look at that that's over time, because it changes all the time, right? So tracking publications and awards, et cetera, is a good way to do that. So
Yeah.
so we've talked about research strengths for WSU, but this is a way to try and actually monitor them.
And it gets at, I used to work in an office of research, and, the research expenditures was our golden cow, if you will. But this gets at beyond that, because you may have departments where their sponsored research, especially federal sponsored research, is not particularly strong, but their books are really strong, or their citations, or their conference proceedings, or even their national awards. So it's, it doesn't get everything. And I don't know how you would do for someone who was in the fine arts. I don't even know how you would do that in a comparative sense, but you still can see all of the demographic data. They're still in there. All faculty are in there. You can look at conference proceedings and books and other exhibits. And it's more sophisticated than just looking at grant productivity, which I think for the social sciences and humanities will be important.
Yeah, I think there's various shows and other things in fine arts that are counted, juried shows.
Yeah. As a communications, specialist, this would be a tool that I would mine my information out of. I mean, there's so many nuggets in there that, create such interesting kind of stories, and it just that the data is being able to have data, and that comparison of the 98th percentile, there in itself is a story, right, around then the success and what's happening at Connors and why is that, right?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I want Phil and his team to have access to this is that Phil gets a phone call and says, hey, we need a quote for someone who knows something about archaeology in Oregon. He can go in this database
and go
find that person. And, he probably already knows everyone at WSU, but.
I will tell you, I could have used that just today. I got a call from a reporter looking for an economist who could talk about inflation. And if I had access to academic analytics, I'd be able to look that up and figure out who the best who the best agricultural economist would have been for that request. So.
Because, what's really interesting, we talked about our cybersecurity degree. When we were putting that together, we were trying to put together what is our existing strength, what do our peers look like, et cetera. We didn't have this on yet when we put that together. And the people who have expertise in cybersecurity are not necessarily in the departments or the colleges that you expect them to be. We have some in the Murrow College. Right. And so if we had this tool, we'd be able to find people that we didn't even know to look in that college. So,
well, to Phil's point too, the interesting thing is that if, there's an ancillary opportunity to become and continue to become a trusted source for information, so that the Seattle Times is going to, not necessarily, it's not about WSU they want, but that WSU is providing them credible access to an economist or credible access to an anthropologist. And so you become a credible news source. That builds the relationship that when you get into sticky waters, you might be able to be more inclined to have better public relations and stories that are coming out because you've built a long-lasting relationship with these various news networks.
Yeah.
So it becomes a tool to, like for people like Phil or for myself, that allow us to build these relationships that ultimately we will, use when we're in some hot water or trouble or however that might look, right? So it has multifaceted kind of approach. And from a marketing communication perspective, it's even, I just think from the standpoint of enrollment and recruitment and what the nuggets you could be pulling from this too is pretty of how you're comparing in certain areas and segmenting audiences that you want to go after, whether it's music students potentially or, students that have an interest in data science, being a data scientist. How do we shape, how are we building our story based on these analytics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other questions, comments?
I guess I was curious about the shift from what I perceived to have been a manual process in the days before to data analytics and what that change management would need to look like. Is there going to be, would you anticipate any pushback from the teams who are going to be evaluated through this? Or I'm just curious about the cultural acceptance.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear from Dave in terms of the conversations in the faculty senate. But those guidelines that I mentioned at the beginning, I mean, we made very clear that we would not be using this for evaluative tool for certainly for individual faculty. And then even for departments, I think the proof is in the pudding is going to be in the tasting, right? So if we develop an annual process, that's where we build trust of, well, you know, what is the process going to be? How are, you know, deans and provosts going to use that? How is it going to be used? And that will then help with the change in thinking about it. As I said, you know, when I used it as a department chair, I found it really empowering for me because I could make a case to my dean why we needed hiring in certain areas by showing our aspirational peers, showing what we were doing with what we had, but really making the case for what we could do with, you know, an additional hire in X, Y, or Z, right? So for me, I found it really empowering, and that's the vision that I have for getting this in department chairs' hands. But Dave, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
I think from the faculty's perspective, we already have a process, a set of procedures for promotion and tenure. And I think the concern was that maybe an administrator or two along the way would go, yeah, I'm going to opt for this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not going to use the process that we've established.
Mhm.
And getting off course like that, I think, scared a lot of people. But when the faculty senate leadership met with the president and the provost, it was obvious that they were very concerned about making sure that there was a fireball there, that would not happen. And I'm quite comfortable working with the current people that we have in leadership here, that nothing like that is going to happen. I can't speak for a department chair. I don't feel like I have my finger on that button, so I wouldn't want to make any speculation in that regard.
Well,
I think, Jeanette, one of the areas I think that all these tools help in is we frequently hear through the faculty senate or APAC or these other groups, well, this is happening, or the tenure rates are different on campuses, or different things like that. And sometimes we lack the ability to provide data around topics that people are interested in. So it's not even us arguing about it. It's, well, here's what it actually is. And I think Elizabeth's done a nice job with some of this that's come up this year around things that people have heard, anecdotal things internally. We're able to say, well, here's the data and information that we have. Here it is. And people can look and go, okay, well, maybe I guess that rumor wasn't true. So I actually feel that internally people like to see the information. This has nothing to do with STEM or whatever. English faculty like to see it just as much as people in engineering. But I think then it provides a little truth in lending to the administration. When we're providing information like that, people can look at it and go, okay, I see that what we've been hearing is actually with the supported by the data. So I think it's going to be important moving forward.
it sounds like a lot of great potential here. And it will be empowering at modernizing to the data world. So I look forward to hearing more about it.
Yeah. And, I guess what I would say in some ways, it's not even replacing a manual process, because we really haven't had a process, certainly on an annual basis. We have not had a process for departments or colleges really taking a look in the mirror and comparing this kind of however you want to try to measure scholarly productivity and evaluating against our peers. That to me is the power of this. Because I remember early on when we were considering this, someone said, well, but we have all this data. We have institutional research. We know what are, a lot of these are public databases. We can go find out Professor so-and-so's publications or grants, what have you. But what we don't have is access to that for 455 institutions. And to be able to iteratively sort of say, well, now let's just look at publics, or let's look at just our peers, or what have you. To me, that's the power. And it allows us in our drive to 25, who are we trying, who we're trying to aspire to be more like or not like, and how do we get there? What will it take from us, meaning, Chris Keene and I, in supporting our colleges and departments? What do we need to do to help?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. And I think a lot of the angst from the faculty comes from the old A2P2 process that took place. What was that, 10 or 12 years ago? I don't know if anybody in this room was even around when we went through and looked at individual units to determine which units we might eliminate in the university. And I remember serving at the college level on that. And I was given a big awkward notebook of information, and I was supposed to review, these half a dozen programs in our college. But of course, I snuck back to the School of Music page and I looked at the information. I was like, holy cow, half of this information is wrong. Okay. And so I went to the dean and I said, how can we be making our decisions based on this information? And the answer was, well, we'll just consider them all to be equally wrong all the way across the board. So I think that's where the angst comes from.
Understandably.
Yeah.
Seems like a good plan.
Let me eliminate that from my quote list to use.
Seriously.
Don't use it. That's number 27. The discussion.
Scratch it.
But Dave, you raise a good point, because I think that was the other concern that I heard, that they had heard that in some cases academic analytics had its data wrong.
Oh, is that right?
Or people had heard from peers.
Okay.
And so what academic analytics said is, look, we take everything we have in there from public sources. So if NSF doesn't have your right grants, or if the citation indices don't have your right publications, that's on them. Lists of our faculty and their ranks comes from us. So if we put bad data in, we're going to give bad data out. So they said, if you ever see anything that's incorrect, you tell us and we'll try to work with you to figure out why it is that way. The other thing that they will give us, which they didn't used to do a few years ago, was they'll do specialized reports for us, or not even reports like on paper, but screens that I'm trying to remember. There was one thing we asked them whether it could do, and they said, well, it can't do that automatically, but we'll build that out for you. So if we have questions that it can't answer now, they will work with us to try to adapt it.
And I would imagine, going along with all of that, if something came up that was kind of erroneous in the database, you'd have some sort of gut feeling for whether it was totally off, if it was an outlier, or not just with experience with the various areas. So I mean, that would, sometimes you just have to look at data and decide, does it feel right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
But it's also important, I think, that we have data-informed decision-making. The data is not making the decision for us. We're not
Right.
just managing with a spreadsheet, and it gives us information to help us support a direction or where we'd like to go. And I think, Jeanette, I worry as we have more, worry, that's too strong a word, but as we have more data and tools available, it's going to be almost tempting to not want to spend the analytical personal time thinking through stuff and just, waving a spreadsheet around. And I think that's, it's not a danger, tomorrow, just over a year or two. If you're not careful, you stop maybe asking some of the other questions you need to, and just relying on the number. And so we got to continue, I think, to discipline ourselves to use it to help us make good decisions, but it's a tool, not the decision maker itself.
Any other questions? Well, this has been just a great presentation and discussion, and really interesting material for us in the future. So I'm anxious to see how it works and how it gets integrated throughout the WSU system. Thank you very much. Okay, are there any other items that anyone would like to bring up at all? Okay, hearing none, I'm just going to announce that the meeting has concluded and that we will be taking a break. And the Regents will be back at 2:30 p.m. for the Finance and Compliance Committee meeting. The YouTube link for the remainder of the meetings can be found on the WSU Board of Regents website. Thank you.